Why think that true artificial intelligence is even possible? Despite the advances in AI research, no serious researcher in AI thinks we've come anywhere close to true AI. That is, artificial intelligence equal to human intelligence across multiple domains. The term here is artificial general intelligence, or AGI. I'm aware that tech CEOs like Sam Altman and Elon Musk say that we're close to AGI, but we also need to take into account that they are selling something. What I want to focus on today is whether or not true AI is even possible, and if so, how could we know? That is, can we know that true AI is possible before anyone achieves it? So let's explore why AI researchers believe this goal can be attained. And just to throw in a little wrinkle, we'll see that the theory of evolution plays an important role in some arguments for the possibility of AI. If you believe that an intelligent creator made the material world, you may not find that line of reasoning persuasive. But by the end of this video, I'll show you that we don't have to leave it there, even if you don't think that intelligence emerges from material processes. There could still be reason to think that some form of AI is possible. When you look at a computer and you see all the wires and circuits, if you're like me, one, you have no idea what's going on, but it's also hard to believe that anything like human intelligence could ever come out of that. Why would ever more complicated circuits ever amount to human intelligence? Why would adding more of the same ever lead to something like intelligence springing forth? The belief that AI is possible, really, it comes down to the human mind and the human brain. The human mind is definitely intelligent, and the brain is the source of that intelligence. Well, many AI researchers, they simply look to the fact that we have an example of an intelligent biological machine, and they see that as establishing that, at least in principle, there could be a non-biological intelligent machine, AI. Well, there are two main lines of thought to the possibility of AI from the human brain, and both are described by Nick Bostrom in his book Superintelligence. But either way, the human brain is the proof of concept for AI. Well, the first line of thought concludes AI is possible because of the origins of the human brain, specifically the evolutionary origins. So the origins argument begins like this. The human brain is the product of evolutionary processes. Therefore, evolution can engineer intelligence. The brain is proof. Now consider what goes into evolution. Evolution builds biological systems through random variation and then natural selection of the best adapted system. In other words, survival of the fittest, random variation and natural selection. You might remember this from high school. Neither of these processes is intelligent. They're simply natural forces. There's no intelligent guidance of either one. Evolution does not aim at any goal, and it doesn't reason through any process. And yet, through blind chance, it generated intelligence. Human engineers, on the other hand, are intelligent. They can make goals, like designing a rocket to go to the moon, and then they can figure out what steps to take to achieve the goals. Human engineers are more intelligent than evolution. So if evolution can blindly and unintentionally create intelligence, well, then it seems like intelligent human engineers can also do this by applying their ingenuity towards that goal. Well, in the book Superintelligence, philosopher Nick Bostrom takes up this line of reasoning and discusses how scientists have even thought evolution could be the method for creating AI. So inspired by the idea that evolution generated human intelligence after only a couple billion years of evolution, some AI scientists have come up with strategies to harness evolution for themselves. So these researchers imagine using modern computing power to create a digital environment that has the same kind of selection pressures as those that guided evolution on Earth. Then AI programs of relatively low intelligence could be placed into this environment and be tasked with adapting to it, just as living organisms did on Earth. There would be processes in this simulated environment to eliminate programs with poor adaptive ability and then select for those with better adaptive ability. This would simulate the survival of the fittest, or selection aspect of evolution. But if we think back to high school and how evolution is supposed to work, it's not enough to simply select better adaptive behavior over worse. There's got to be some source of new prototypes. There's got to be some way to inject new kinds of adaptive behavior into the world. So this would be the random variation side. So how would we inject new kinds of adaptive behavior into the system? Well, here's where the evolutionary strategy for AI diverges into two paths. One strategy would be to completely recapitulate evolution, randomness and all. So the engineers would have to create some way of injecting randomness into the setup. The idea behind evolution is very small and random mutations emerge, and just a tiny fraction of them improve the mutant over its ancestors. All right, so we get these superior designs through mutations. Well, once one arrives, natural selection kicks in, and the newer and superior mutant prevails over the others that lack the mutation. And this process happens over and over, countless times, to generate the complex structures and behaviors that we see in animals today. Now, in evolution, these mutations emerge as DNA is copied in the process of reproduction. So one challenge for the scientists would be figuring out, how are we going to mimic this? How are we going to get random variations in the programs? So imagine that this simulated environment could be created, and then using computing technology, massively sped up. I don't think the researchers want to wait billions of years. Would human intelligence evolve? Well, Bostrom points out some problems with this approach. First, creating a simulated environment with the complexity of Earth as life evolved, it would be impossible using today's technology. That is, to recapitulate evolution, the simulated world would have to be enormously rich and complex to have the same kind of variation and selection pressures of the real world. And to fully represent the neural architecture that is supposed to evolve, this would also require a ton of computing resources. And altogether, we can just Bostrom calls this optimizing power. So tremendous resources to recreate the optimizing power of Earth in the evolutionary process. Well, Bostrom does some fancy math. I'm just going to summarize it. But he considers the number of flops. So this is basically computer operations per second, more or less. And he considers how many flops would you need to simulate a single neuron. It turns out about 1.2 million. Well, how many neurons are in the nervous system of a simple organism like an insect? It's a big number. I don't even know how big this number is. It's 10 to the 6th power. Then you need to figure out how many insects had to live and die during the process of evolution for their neural architecture to evolve. Bostrom ultimately comes up with a number of flops needed to attempt this recapitulation over 1 billion years, and it comes to an absurd number, 10 to the 44th power. Well, our most advanced supercomputers today are dozens of orders of magnitude short of the computing power needed. Not only is this amount of computing power far beyond anything we have today, but even if computing power continued to increase, according to the famous Moore's law, for the next century, it would still remain out of reach. So recapitulation of evolution is currently impossible, and also it's not guaranteed to work. And this is a good segue into the other strategy, and that is guiding evolution by, wait for it, intelligent design. That is, neither the mutations nor the selection pressures would have to be purely random. Human engineers could apply their intelligence to introduce mutations, essentially choosing them based on which they think are likely to increase intelligence, and they could also adjust the selection pressures that they think are likely to reward intelligence. And you would think that the intelligence guidance of human engineers could make up for some of this lack of computing power by making the process more efficient and speeding it up. However, there's another problem. Bostrom reminds us that we don't actually know how likely or how unlikely the emergence of human intelligence via evolution actually is. So suppose we really could create a high-fidelity simulation of the world as it was when life and intelligence evolved. Why think that it would be likely to produce human intelligence? That is, even if we have this incredibly complex environment that simulates Earth, the likelihood of human intelligence emerging through evolution might still be tiny, as human intelligence might be a lucky accident on a cosmic scale. So even granting all the incredible computing resources and adding in the assistance of human intelligence, the emergence of intelligence from evolution could still be so unlikely as not to make any practical difference. Now, there's another problem here, and if you're someone doubtful about evolution, you might already be thinking in this direction. So what if you're a theist who doesn't believe in evolution? What if you think it's impossible for a process like evolution to randomly arrive at intelligence? Well, let me give you a way of thinking of this that's going to be helpful for thinking about this problem no matter how you come down on evolution. When thinking about the relationship between intelligence and matter, philosophers have come to different conclusions about which is more fundamental. That is, which came first and which emerged out of which. So for example, on materialism, matter is fundamental and ideas and intelligence only come about later through material processes, like evolution. However, on the typical Christian view, God is non-material and has complete and unbounded intelligence and creates the material world out of nothing. So this is literally mind over matter. On this view, intelligence is not something that develops over time. It's complete and it has no beginning. It is the most fundamental mode of being there is. On some forms of Platonism, we get a very similar picture. The ideal forms and the intelligent mind are prior to the material world, which emerges from them. The difference is, instead of God deliberately making matter out of nothing, the material world emerges out of God's mind by emanating from it. So the material world is like a shadow or a copy of the ideal and heavenly. Well, on either of these two views, intelligence is foundational and primitive, has no essential material part or component, and intelligence is also holistic. The highest form of intelligence is the original, and inferior intelligences are derivative from that whole. Another way to put it, you might say that limited intelligences, like those of ours and those of animals, are merely partial copies of the original. So the highest form of intelligence was not assembled piecemeal by modifications of lower intelligence. It is original and self-sufficient. Well, if this view of intelligence prior to matter is correct, the evolutionary story is not going to work. That story is materialist. Matter is fundamental and original. Ideas and intelligence are secondary and derived from material processes. So now it's starting to look like whether or not you think intelligence can be produced by evolution hinges on your view of ideas and matter and which is more fundamental. If you think matter is prior to ideas, well, you're a materialist, and you have to think that evolution, or something like it, must be how intelligence originated from matter. But if you believe that the ideal and the heavenly is prior to the material world, then evolutionary production of intelligence seems impossible. And with it, artificial intelligence through any simulation of evolution. So does the plausibility of AI really just come down to these sorts of philosophical commitments? That is, could it really be as simple as, if you're a materialist, AI is possible? If not, then it isn't. Well, even if you believe that material processes could never yield true intelligence or a soul, there is a way of understanding AI that's worth considering. Bostrom essentially defines intelligence as problem solving. That is, intelligence is shown by problem-solving behavior. His definition of intelligence is essentially pragmatic. Think of it like an inversion of Forrest Gump's stupid is as stupid does. So here, intelligence is as intelligent does. So what matters is not whether or not there's a soul. What matters is not whether or not there's like a rational, what the Greeks would call nous. All that matters is intelligent behavior. So even if we have philosophical or theological reasons for thinking that true intelligence and understanding can't come out of matter, we might grant that problem-solving behavior or intelligent behavior can. After all, a chess engine, that's an example of a program that solves problems and produces intelligent behavior. Now you might object, well, look, chess engines, those are trained by imitating human grandmasters. This is true, and it actually points to the other way that the fact of human intelligence gives hope to AI researchers that true AI is possible. So here's the thing. Even if we set aside ontological questions about the priority of mind and matter, it certainly seems that our own intelligent behavior is dependent upon our brains. People with brain damage, like from a stroke, struggle to perform cognitive tasks, and they really have difficulty solving problems that they could before. Neuroscience has even discovered some of the ways that our brains process information and make intelligent behavior possible. So Bostrom thinks we have reason to think that AI is possible simply because we have the brain as a template. The more that neuroscientists come to understand the architecture of the brain and how it processes information, then the more that it would seem that this architecture and these processes could be imitated. So think about it like this. Suppose we mapped out every neural pathway in the brain, and we had a complete theory of the brain and every neural process. Why couldn't we simulate that on a computer program and generate intelligent behavior? And so sure, the program might not have a soul. I mean, I think it definitely would not. It definitely would not be conscious. And it might not even represent true intelligence. But if it can process information just like the brain, would it be capable of the same kind of intelligent behavior as the brain? So the fact that the brain is a biological machine that facilitates intelligent behavior gives us reason to think that a non-biological machine might do the same, if by no other means than copying the brain's neural architecture and mimicking its processes. This doesn't make AI a foregone conclusion, but it would establish that it's at least in principle possible. And it would seem that the extent to which we can simulate human intelligence would be limited only by the extent to which neuroscientists come to understand the cognitive structure of the brain. So even if you don't believe in evolution, even if you think that intelligence is prior to matter, it might be that a machine mimicking the human brain could produce intelligent behavior. And for most of the purposes of AI, that's all the engineers are looking to achieve. All right, well, thank you for checking out this video. If you're interested in more of these kinds of conversations, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.